Go ahead, Janet.
Okay. Since childhood, I've had a number of odd events in my life that I couldn't explain. So, like many of us, I shoved them aside and discounted them. It started back when I was young. But what these events were, because I'd never heard of near-death experiences back then. So that's why I didn't know what they were. And there was no spirituality in my family's sphere. So I would like to start by saying that the idea that we are separate from the Creator is absolutely false. Because our spirit is our share of God's spirit who lives inside of us. And I witnessed this. So God's spirit who lives inside of us, it's through God's spirit that the superpowers of heaven live life and experience life with us. They know everything we do and what we express and what we think, because they are a part of us. God is not only inside of us. This is all the things that I learned. He is everything outside of us. And just by his intention, he manipulates matter and energy to create what he desires, as he created us. Just like those of us who are parents, no matter what our children do, we love them and want to help guide them back to a better pathway. But we would never, ever discard them. Now, since God is absolutely everything in the cosmos and beyond, I have no doubt that God is the quantum theory. I think we hear a lot of near-death experiencers talking about that he is the king of quantum. And that's why scientists who have studied the quanta say that while they conducted their test, the energy works one way, but when they try to record it with a camera, then the tests don't work as anymore. So they set up a panel of slits and shot energy through them. And there's a great cartoon video on YouTube that's called The Easy Quantum Mechanics, and it's a kind of a cartoon video, and anybody can understand what it's saying. But the scientists have confirmed that God is the quantum theory in its entirety. And I found out myself when floating out in the universe, talking with other souls about a subject matter that I don't remember. And when the group broke up, the rest of the group left, and I was there with God. I believe it was God because even though he took a human form, he can do whatever he wants when he desires. And I could see that he was much larger than the Jesus that I saw. And even though I could see him from the chest down, I was not allowed to see his face. Both not being able to see his face and what I'm going to share next leads me to believe that it was God. It could have been Jesus, though, he was much larger than Jesus. He and I could see Earth as if it was a basketball out in, floating out in the universe. And the colors were vibrant, and it was just absolutely gorgeous. And that's when, while looking at the Earth, I asked God, what's it all about? And in answer to my question, he extended his right arm out before him, and with his palm side up, he raised his arm and said, "Behold." And then instantly I saw lights zipping across the universe, creating lines in several directions. And the sound of the lights zipping by reminded me of Luke Skywalker's sword, the sound that it made when he swung it back and forth. Do you guys all remember that movie? And I instantly knew at that moment when this happened and I saw these lines that God had created many dimensions and each one had a purpose. And even though he didn't specifically show me life forms, I somehow knew that each dimension contained life. And I also understood the answer to my question as if I had been a great mathematician at one time, because it made sense to me. And I said, "Oh, I understand. It's all about math." And he replied by saying yes. That might seem strange, but later I found out that Max Planck was a German theoretical physicist who discovered the energy quanta and won him a Nobel Prize in physics in 1918. He was the first person to come up with a quantum theory, and he based the results on math. The quantum theory is a theory of modern physics that explains the behavior of matter and energy, not only at the atomic level, but at the subatomic level. That sounds like the creator, doesn't it? Don't you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. Also, Galileo famously said that the universe is written in the language of mathematics. And now I've read that Max Tegmark, a Swedish-American physicist, says the universe is mathematics. So I have no doubt that the quantum theory, even though it didn't have a name in those days, is what Paul was referring to in the Bible when he said Christ is the one whom created everything in heaven and earth. He, meaning God, created things we can see and things we cannot see. Kings, kingdom, rulers, and authorities. Everything has been created through him and for him. He existed before everything. And that just supports that he is the quantum theory. Now, that also seems to allude to, that scripture also seems to allude to many faiths that have the same loving light, but they call it by a different name, is part of the kings and leaders that he was referring to. So because that's the studies of the VBIANDS organization, that they, no matter what faith, they always describe the loving light that is the leader of their faith. So, and if you consider the size of us as a single piece of sand in the entire cosmos, we don't even seem to exist. But God treasures each and every one of us, no matter our size, status, or accomplishments and failures. He loves each one of us unconditionally, as if there was no other one else in the universe. And you'll hear about that shortly. There's a few other things I've learned before I get into what happened. We have agreements to play important parts in other people's lives, or we've agreed to cross paths with other souls for a special lesson, but it's up to us to interact with that person to find the information we need. It's kind of like going shopping and you're trying to find that special shirt that you'd like to wear to the special occasion. We have to search for these things and to find them. So we help each other by teaching and giving information. And some of the contracts for me, was a contract with my daughter Gina, a contract with my son Kurt, a contract with my now husband Bob, which I mentioned that I was going over to see. I have no doubt that I also had a contract with my son Philip, even though he wasn't mentioned in the NDEs, because he's the one that stabilized all, should I say, the rocky seas for each of us at different times in our lives. And I also had a contract with James Demos, a medium, who told me about my guide and who I saw when I was 15. A contract with Teresa Dunwell, an artist who rocked my world when she painted something I didn't expect. And because God's Spirit lives in us and experiences life with us, as Scripture says, that this Scripture makes sense. What you do to the least of man, you do to me, because we're Him. Our spirit is God's share, our share of God's Spirit. So it's important that we consider every action or word that comes out of our mouth. I know I always think about the life review. And if I don't say the right thing, what am I going to have to live through? So I'm very aware of everything I say and do since my experiences. I also learned that we've got guides and watcher angels and other spiritual guidance around us all the time that nudge us in different directions to keep us on our pathway, but they don't interfere. They can't interfere unless we request that they do. And that only happens if it doesn't interfere with our lesson plan or somebody else's lesson. After all, we have free will. We have free will to do both good and bad. And in the next item, I hold dear to my heart, because in my third ND, which you'll hear about, I took several. What's that?
Let's see if I can mute people. Participants.
Can you mute us, those of us on the
Angela.
internet, on Zoom?
Going down to see. There it is. I think I found the right person.
Okay. Well, what I was going to say is I took several different forms in my third near-death experience, one of which was an orb. I was a shining orb of light. And so I hold orbs very dear to me because I know that some of them are spiritual beings or our guides or loved ones. So I always suggest that people put pictures with orbs in them in a folder. And you'll notice that they're most generally behind you if it's a guide, because they're always following and watching you. If you're sitting down, they can be to the side and be in front. So eventually, once you see these orbs enough, you'll come to understand that they're here to help us. And those are the part of the angelic help that we have available to us. So our guides are usually, like I said, above us, and prayers are answered. This is another thing. Prayers are answered if it doesn't interfere with someone else's plan, like I mentioned earlier. And certain moments in our life are planned and will occur no matter what pathway we choose to take. But depending on the path we choose, the road, just like a vacation, you go in one direction to see different sights and experience different things. One roadway may have manifest whatever's going to happen in a different way. It could be better or it could be worse. But we're always guided back to the best pathway if we listen to our inner guidance. And God can create illnesses. I found that in my experience. He can create illnesses or bad situations to nudge us along in our lifetime. And He can heal a body. He can even heal our soul. Well, we should always be positive and not condemning. We are all here and learning, and it's important how we respond to adversity, because there are levels to heaven, and we all want to go to a higher level through our accomplishments and possibly not have to come back, because I know that I feel that there's life after life, like Raymond Moody said. And I also know from experience that words carry power. And so we should always lift others and speak positively, because it's, as it says in Proverbs, that as a tree gives fruit, healing words give life, but dishonest words crush the spirit. So in my story, there's a chapter about what happened with my son, and it was one sentence that I told him that changed his life. And that just shows how our power of our words can change a person's life. Now, let's jump to the third near-death experience for a brief second, because that's the foundation of my story. Let me take a drink. I'm having problems here. The third NDE was the most spiritually intense. And it revealed to me the important moments of my life, some of which I discovered were actually near-death experiences. Some of the ones that I would talk about, mentioned in childhood, though some of those were near-death experiences. And some were moments that were of a spiritual nature as well. And it was, I was given a task to understand them. So my book is based off those moments and what I learned from them, the deeper meaning of those moments. But I won't be sharing all of them today because there's just too many of them. So each time I had an aha moment when I analyzed this in the situation, and I knew that, I said, that's what he's showing me. He showed up. Jesus showed up in front of me. And sometimes it was in full form. Sometimes it was only in the half form, and he was nodding his head. Sometimes it was just by a whisper of yes. And one time it was, he was behind me. And that was when I discovered that love is the only thing that matters. He touched my shoulder, put his hand on my right shoulder while he was behind me, and shot me with love. So we are, when we realize what happens in our life, it's important. There's important moments in our life that we need to learn from. No, actually, there's a lot of stuff that we need from. And after I learned that about that particular moment, that love was more important than material possessions, it was as if I was rewarded by God, because 3 weeks after that, I had wealth start pouring into my life, because I thought, if I only had love and was surrounded by the people who unconditionally loved me, I didn't need anything. So some of the instances in my life that I recognized yet didn't remember, there was moments that God showed me that had happened, and I recognized them, but there were some that I didn't recognize because they did not happen yet. And that's where I've gained all this learning. What I've come to know is that all my life, Spirit has guided me, and it guides everybody every day. I speak to it every day. When things pop into my head, I know that's my guidance. So I grew up Christian. So as I tell my story, I often refer to God and Jesus as a he, but the God I know is a genderless and doesn't, he can actually manifest in any way he desires. And everything I describe, even though it's with scripture, it also crosses over into spirituality, and there's a purpose behind this. So please forgive my terminology if I slip. Some people get irritated with me, but this just happens to be the way I grew up. So replace the terminology with the one you're comfortable with. So I want to say that I believe God has bigger plans when he creates all these experiences, and he wants to bring both genres closer together. This is so that the Christian faith will start realizing that we're all doing the same thing. We're just using different terminology. We're always trying to find our way home. So now that you know it's based on moments, let's go back in time to where some of it started. This isn't the first moment, but this is an important moment. I was at pre-kindergarten age, and it turns out that I had a precognitive vision. I was bored because everybody was in school, and I didn't have anybody to play with. So my mom was on the telephone having a conversation with a friend of hers, and they were talking about adoption. And so I asked her if I was adopted. And of course, she assured me that I was her little girl. But I always remember what came out of my mouth next was, I said, okay, but I'm going to die young. Mom was shocked, of course, and she demanded I quit talking like that. But since I was so young, I had no contemplation, didn't understand what age was about. So I kind of stood there thinking, what is age? And that's when I had 3 visions flash through my mind, took up the whole frontal area of my mind. And those visions ended up being the ages of my 3 near-death experiences that were planned to occur. So my near-death experiences were actually planned to occur. The visionary moments of seeing the future supports the Bible verse, you saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. I want to point out the word moment, because that's what God shows me. He says these moments matter. What God specifically said was, understand these moments, they matter. And these were supposed to be significant to my life, and we all have them. I knew this because immediately upon leaving my body in this NDE, I was connected to God's consciousness. And I knew everything at that time. I undoubtedly believed that God was using my life as an example of how it or he, however you want to prefer to God, how he works in everybody's life. So he wants everybody to know this is how he works in everybody's lives. It's also important to know that every choice we make can take on a different pathway. There is a passage in the Bible that says, I will guide you along the best pathway. It doesn't say there's only one pathway. So we're not robots. You hear these say, what are we, robots then? No, we're not robots. We have free will to go whatever direction we want to, but certain lessons are planned to occur for learning. They may manifest in a more difficult way, if on one pathway, or an easier one, depending on which road we choose. So it's kind of important to listen to our inner guidance. Now we'll take you to the first NDE. Occurred at the age of 15 when I became very ill. My mom was worried about me because I was so sick, and she slept with me. She took my sister out of the room and came to bed with me. And she was lying beside me each night while I was sick. And while I was lying in bed, looking up at the ceiling that had been turned up, the ceiling light, it had been turned off for the night. And I felt like death warmed over. So how I could say it, I could smell, the sweet and sour scent of when you're really sick. And I also heard a strange buzzing vibration. And still looking up, I became dizzy, and the strange sensation that I felt like I fell backwards through the mattress. But that's not what happened, because I was still lying in bed, but it was my spirit that had fallen from my body. and it exited my body in that direction. Then in spirit, I was looking upward toward the ceiling again, and the ceiling light transformed. It started turning to the right very fast, really quick motion, and the whole ceiling transformed into bubbling clouds. Then in two separate areas of the clouds, there was two other spinning motions that started to occur. And those quickly created holes through the clouds into two other worlds. When peering through the opening to the left, because that's where my attention, that opened up first. And I saw through the hole a sumo wrestler with a top knot in his hair. And he was dressed in white, in a white room, surrounded in a radiant white light. And all he did was watch me. No matter how he moved, he kept his eyes locked on me and watched me. Now, who would think a sumo wrestler would be, in the sky, in a white room looking down on me? So I must have had some kind of connection to that area of the world at one point in time in a lifetime. Then I heard the most beautiful music I had ever heard. It was glorious, and it was coming from the direction of the other tunnel, which had opened up in the meantime. And that's when I saw a stunning young woman with long, thick, almost black hair swish into the opening. She seems to have come right. I described her as coming riding in on the Sound of Music. That's a good movie, though, to Sound of Music. But it was glorious music that I had never heard before. And at that time, I thought of her as Daddy's little girl and the music box lady, because those were the only things I could associate her with at that time in my life. Because back in those days, they only had like 3 channels on television. We didn't have internet, so we had to use our imagination and our toys to entertain ourselves or go outside and play. So we didn't have all this the capabilities they have today to create unusual things on TV. And I knew she was standing, she had moved to this sideways. So I was looking at her in profile, and she was communicating with the wrestler. But I knew, even though I didn't know what they were discussing, I knew it was about me. And when their discussion ended, the two beings magically transformed into glowing orbs of light and left the room. And then I settled back into my body and immediately ran for the bathroom to throw up. But while they were talking, I want to mention that I was fascinated by her dress, because I had worked that previous summer, that summertime, working, detasseling corn to earn money so I could purchase new clothes for high school, because I was between middle school and high school, and I was just getting ready to go to high school, and I loved fashion. So her dress was so beautiful, and I found myself up at the dress, flying through the loops, just like they were huge caverns, and I could fly through them, and I could feel my windblown hair behind me and I felt like I was a skier skiing down a hillside toward a goal. And after they turned into balls of light, she did move up and away. She moved up and away at one point before she turned into a ball of light. She moved up and away, and that's why I thought of her as Daddy's little girl. And then when she came back, that's when they discussed some more. And then that's when they flew away. And they went around the side of the house, and they watched me through the side window. Well, I've come to find out that the music box lady was my daughter, who was not going to be conceived or born until 15 years later. So I obviously had an agreement with her to be her mom. And if I had died that night, she would not have been born. And that's why she came to see my guide, the sumo wrestler, to make sure that I got back in my body, because she wanted to have an earth and life experience. And that's why at some level I must have known that she was my future daughter, because that's why I thought of her as Daddy's little girl, and that Daddy was putting her on a pedestal when she moved up and away for a time. And I wasn't allowed to, I believe I wasn't allowed to remember any of this information, this conference. I wasn't allowed in on this conversation, because I would have always been searching for the right father for that daughter. And I'd always wonder with each man, is this the right man for that daughter? So they let me play out my life as it was supposed to. Now, the second NDE occurred when I was involved in a severe car accident, and I was saved by divine intervention. That accident pushed the door of my awareness open, so I could not discount it any longer. So, but who could I tell? You know, who was going to believe me? So I kept quiet. At this time, when the accident happened, I was working in my longtime career, and was a single mom of 3 children, all on my own. I didn't have relatives close by. It was just me, and I didn't want to take them far away from their dad, so I stayed local. My parents, who lived a long ways away, they lived in Boise, Idaho, called that summer, that spring, and asked if they could have the children for a month, since on the vacation, on the spring, summer vacation, since they didn't get to see them much. And they'd like to. They planned some outings for themselves. But I didn't know at the time that was God's way of saving my children for what was going to happen. Otherwise, they would have been in the car with me that day. So I took a vacation, and I delivered them out to my mom and dad, stayed for a few days, and returned to the Denver area where I lived at that time, so that I could have a couple of days for myself before I had to go back to work on Monday. And we had a huge backyard deck, and I wanted to decorate it with lovely flowers, because it was end of May, beginning of June. Actually, it was, end of May, beginning of June. And I wanted to decorate it with flowers so it looked nice with the kids, for the kids when they returned, because we liked to barbecue out there. And they always had a swimming pool too. Well, looking forward to my day, I drove to the flower nursery to get all my beautiful supplies. And on my way home, there was virtually no traffic in the area. There was 3 lanes going in both directions. But the direction that I was going to be traveling to get home, there was no cars, and there was only 1 car going in the opposite direction, virtually no traffic. And so I wasn't concerned. I pulled out in the first lane, moving over to the middle lane, because I always like to be in the middle lane. It gives me options. So the traffic wasn't concerned. I noticed, though, as I headed toward home, and I wasn't very far away. I was actually only like a block, because I pulled out of the parking lot and then quickly stopped at the stop sign until it circled to green. And then when I went through the green light, there was a big dip in the road. This section of the road had a big dip that went down and then back up on the other side. They have since filled in that dip, by the way, probably because maybe there were so many things that happened there. But I noticed there was a car in front of me, and it seemed to be stopped because I was getting closer too fast. And that's when I in a flash started looking around at the situation. And I could have gone around this car, but I noticed that there was a park on one side and there was a grassy area on the other side. With the park being there, I didn't know if a child had cut through, either going to the park or going home, or which direction they would be going in front of that car. So I decided to stop behind it. And I glanced in my rearview mirror after I had stopped, and I noticed that while I had been sitting at the light up there, the traffic that had been so far in a distance had caught up and gotten closer. Well, the light had cycled again, and then all of a sudden, all this traffic started coming down the road toward me, and they were racing down the hill as if they were racehorses, running to a finish line. And there was no lane that was empty. That was no place for the traffic to go. And the vehicle behind me was a pickup truck. And even though was looking in the rearview mirror, my focus became him. And I could see that he was looking to the right and didn't notice that I had stopped. And in that instant, I knew he was going to hit me. Now, the speed zone in that area was approximately 45 miles per hour. So he was going along at a pretty good clip. Not to mention he was going downhill, and you know how the cars pick up speed as they go downhill. So out of desperation, I had a thought in my mind because I hadn't fastened my seatbelt yet. I wasn't that far from the nursery, and I was going to do it on my way home. Not a good thing to do, but that's what I did. I was still kind of dreaming about my flowers. And I didn't have time to buckle it anymore. I just knew that. And I yelled in my mind, oh God, he's going to hit me. And then I heard a voice. I heard a voice that said, lay down across the seat and cover your face. Well, I did as I was told because that's all I could do. And then I heard, I felt the impact of the guy hitting the back of my car. And it felt like a mere bump, like a bump in the side of a bed. But that vehicle had annihilated the back of my car. And then when I pulled my arms down from in front of me, I looked up again because it seemed like nothing much happened. Then I saw the window above me shattering in slow motion, and it was creating a beautiful piece of artwork as it, little lines were created. And I knew it was going to rain down on me, so I covered my face again. Then that collision had pushed me into the car in front of me. I was now sandwiched between two other vehicles. And all of a sudden I felt a arm. I should have been propelled forward, but I felt an arm come under my arms, under here, and another arm come under my knees. And I could feel that I was being picked up by something that I couldn't see. And I found myself in another world, looking down on the scene through a hole in the clouds, even though it was a cloudless day. So I had been picked up and taken to another dimension where I watched the scene below, and I could see that a driver had pulled over going in the other direction and had run across the street to help in its efforts to help. And I found out later that a nurse had stopped on her way to work, and that was the direction that the hospital was in. So that may have been the nurse that had stopped to help. God puts help in our way in the area to help us, or maybe that was an angel. I don't know. But anyway, it was there to help. And in that gauzy hole I was looking through, obviously was the veil that separates one dimension from another. Because remember, in my first near-death experience, I was looking through holes in the cloud into different direction. This time I was on the other side. It was another dimension, looking back into this world. And I could feel the arms of the angelic being holding me by the touch of their touch that was above my elbows on my arms. And so I have, that was my assistance that God sent from my call. He had understood my call. Oh God, he's going to hit me as a call for help. And my prayers were answered in that instance. And that's why I know that prayers are answered, but only if they don't interfere with somebody's lesson plan. But this was part of my lesson plan because it was a planned experience. I need a drink. I have dry mouth syndrome, so it's kind of especially bad today for some reason. So after that NDE, there was a scripture I came across that became very meaningful to me, and it's when it says, "Call to me in times of trouble, and I will save you, and you will honor me." Well, that is significant for what's going to happen, because he was going to transform me into someone that would honor him, and that's what I'm doing now. Because I was always very shy, didn't want to be noticed, and now through his direction, I had to write a book and speak about it, which I'll tell you about. But that's not the only moment that the prayers were answered for me. The third NDE was unquestionably created in a way that I would know it was an answer to a prayer that I had prayed to 2 years previously at a Pepsi event center. As God organizes everything, between the second NDE and the third NDE, well, my world fell apart. Everything in my life was wonderful, and I loved my job and my work and my family, and I had gotten married. And during this time frame, I felt like I was being erased. Literally, I felt like I was being erased by some unseen force, and the doctors couldn't figure out what was the cause. And as there's no coincidences in life, God helped me understand that there was by my husband at the time, Gavin, he has cousin called one day and was coming to the area, the Denver area, and Gavin had not seen his cousin for I don't know how many years. I wasn't sure I even met him before, even through the long time that we had been together. And he wanted to invite us to the Pepsi Event Center so we could see him. And there was going to be he worked on the musical staff for a famous pastor who is supposedly well known, but I had never heard of him before. And Gavin asked if I'd like to go. And of course I said yes, because I wanted to meet his cousin. And while at the center, the pastor gave very motivational talk. It was very inspiring. And while I in the crowd, because the Pepsi Center was filled to the hilt, people couldn't even get in for this gentleman that was there to talk. And the songs that we sang to were like, "Jesus, you're all I need. He touched me. He's the savior of my soul, and breathe upon me breath of God." And God created my third near-death experience, as you hear, to reflect those prayers so that I would know that this NDE was the answer to my prayers. So let's go to the ranch. I had been doing chores outside, And I had come in the house, and in this particular fall, I had developed an allergy that I'd never had before. It congested me really bad, and I thought it was caused by the hay, because we had horses, or the grass. There was a huge area that I had to mow, and so I thought it was because of that. But I was so congested when I went inside that I would have to take allergy pills to clean up my sinuses so that I could breathe. And one particular night, I was more congested than other days. And so when I went to bed, I propped 3 pillows up on top of each other so that I could breathe better. And I fell asleep. I always fall asleep on my back, and I had my hands clasped over my tummy. And during the night, my chest began to hurt because I couldn't breathe. My breathing had been cut off. And so I reached for my husband, but I didn't feel him. I called for him to help me, and he didn't respond. Then just like a snap, I was out of my body. Just from one moment to the next, I was out of my body, looking down on my husband and I lying in bed. And I had felt like I had taken the biggest, freshest breath that I had ever had. And I felt absolute freedom. And I was floating in a velvety darkness of unconditional peace, love, and tranquility. It was magnificent. Felt like a magnificent spa day where you're pampered and you're so relaxed. And I was instantly connected. This is when I was instantly connected to the universal consciousness, and I knew everything was as it should be. I could see myself and my husband lying in bed below. And when I looked down on my body, I knew I was dead, and I was surprised by how I looked. And I wanted to see more of my physical body. So just by that desire, I found myself zooming in to see my body from different directions. And then I returned to not at the ceiling height, it was above the ceiling height, but the ceiling had disappeared, and I could still see down into my room. So I was a bit higher. And that's when I looked around to see what I was in. And I could see that it was in darkness, but I didn't notice any stars. And I had rotated, and I felt like I was floating face up in an immense pool of love, and I could feel my energetic arms floating out to my side, and they were elongated because they were no longer encapsulated in the physical body. They were elongated, and then I noticed a silver cord float by, and it floated by in front of me from left to right in an atmosphere, like on a spacecraft that had no gravity. And when I saw the silver cord float by, my vision had tracked that way, and I noticed that there was a light, a pin of light approaching in a slight S-shaped curve off to the right of where I was. But I wasn't interested in that light. It didn't concern me. I was more interested in what was going on down in my physical body, because I noticed something lifting out of my physical legs, and it was really interesting. I saw an energy, the color of the blue sky on a beautiful day, and it shimmered, and it was floating up out of my feet. Then it worked its way up out of my shins and then out of my thighs. And when the energy escaped the body, I could feel it drawing up toward me, and I could see all this because I was the energetic body that had already left the upper part of my body. And now I was watching my blue spirit body exit the lower half of my body. So I, in spirit form, had stretched to escape the physical form. Maybe it's because it was just an NDE and not my real time to go, but I stretched to get out of there. And I knew that this was my own slice. I instantly knew that that was this blue spirit body, me, was my slice of the creator spirit, known as the Holy Spirit, or for spirituality, it's the spirit or soul. And that's why Source says he lives in us and experiences life in us, with us, because he really does. He lives inside of us. Our energetic consciousness is our slice of God's spirit. When the blue energy totally left my body, I finally floated up. It finally floated up to me and I became whole again. I became a new form. I changed from that blue spirit body and I morphed into the shape of an orb that glowed. I think I mentioned this earlier. And I was then felt like I was sitting in a wand of love, because everything in heaven is made of love. And while the metamorphosis took place, I can describe it like this. I could sense my shape changing because my energetic spiritual arms came in toward me and they folded in, and my energetic body from the lower half pulled up, and I could feel it pulling in too as I created an orb shape. And my vision through it went through a fishbowl effect until the transformation was complete. And then it was extraordinary vision. Now in the real life, I was borderline blind. I had to feel for my glasses every morning. So when I took them off at night, I had to know where I placed them. Otherwise, I simply could not find them unless somebody helped me. And during the day, as I got a little bit older, I did get contacts, but I always had to wear glasses before bed and before I put my contacts in. And at that time, I noticed that I was glowing. I was glowing just like the light had been zooming toward my room. Now, then suddenly, the glowing light that was approaching my room zipped in front of me and stopped, and miraculously changed form into the most incredible heavenly light being I had ever seen. Well, I had not seen any other ones before. Well, sumo wrestler, but this was different. Initially, I could see the light being's hair, the shape of its face, and its clothing, but I couldn't see its face, the identifying features clearly, because he was infused with light, and he had light rays coming out of his heart center, and that was obstructing my view. The light being, I later find out, was Jesus. Jesus, through another experience that is not here during this talk. Jesus knew who I was, and he loved me just simply for existing. We all are loved just simply for existing and letting him experience life through us. So he loves us unconditionally, every single one of us. To describe him, he had hair kind of down to his shoulders, but it was kind of thin haired, wasn't a thick hair. And I could detect movement because I saw brown strands of hair being blown across his chin. And he had a white robe on that went to the ground, well, to his feet. And he had his arms open wide in a welcoming gesture. And his gown was tied at the waist with a rope, and his sleeves, hung from his wrists. And I now know that was Jesus. and I was in awe of who I was seeing. I couldn't speak. I just literally couldn't speak. I only could gawk at him and look at him. And I felt his magnificent love toward me, and I felt love toward him that can't be expressed either. And in the meantime, while this was going on, I noticed a second pin of light coming from the distance off the left. And it kept getting bigger and bigger. But I turned my focus back to Jesus, because he held his hand out to me in a palm up, a gesture of come take my hand. And when I saw that gesture, I was thinking about my daughter. When he said it's time to come home, Jan, I thought about my daughter and how she'd take my death. And just by merely that thought, he answered my question and said she'll be okay. Now, she says she'll disagree with that, but he said she'll be okay. So suddenly the second light that had approached and grew into a light being that was now next to Jesus. And that's where the hair was going. The hair was being drawn toward that light. But that light was alive, and it was Jesus in all of his essence. And I could see bubbling clouds around the outside of the light, and he almost had a cornucopia shape. But I think that there's a reason for that too. He's not only the tunnel, but I think I was at the tunnel, at the end of the tunnel, and the light radiating in was God himself. And that's why there's a scripture that says God will come in the clouds, because all these things happen with clouds. So that all made sense to me with my belief system. Now, it probably would have manifested differently for somebody of another faith. But this light exuded the purest, untainted, unconditional love that can't be fathomed. And even though it radiated white light, I could feel the rays of magnificent color coming out of it. But that's when God reached out with two energetic rainbow arms, and he pulled me in and he embraced me. And I felt like the arms were around me and my back was against his chest, even though he was just energy. And he told me I was perfect in every way. And while he held me, he showed me many movie moments of my life and told me, understand these moments, they matter. That's why I started out with this, because this is where my story comes from. Some of these moments I recognized, and some I didn't, because they hadn't happened yet. Some were moments that were so far out in the future, it was 17 years. So as you can imagine, I didn't want to go back to my body, because how many of you are in near-death experiencers? Is there a lot of them that have near-death experience? Oh, okay. Well, you know you don't want to go back to your body, because you're feeling all that love. You know, who would want to go back to their body? So I wanted to understand this in heaven. But God wanted to convince me to stay. And so he released me after showing me these moments, and there was a lot of them. And because I didn't want to go back to my body, the angels came for me. And then they took me high into the sky and showed me the immediate future of my death and what would happen. Now, when the angels came, I changed forms again from the orb shape into a white translucent person, a shape of a person, probably me. But all this changing of forms tells us that the spirit can manifest itself into whatever form it needs to or desires to. So as I was watching what unfolded, I became one with the universe. And this is where I had a veridical experience and could be in all places at all times. And I was okay with my death. So I still wanted to go to heaven. But to explain this experience, it was a vision. God was showing me a vision of what would happen, but I was experiencing that vision like I was living it. It seemed like we had jumped ahead in time so that I could see what was going to happen. And then all of a sudden I was back before the light of God again. So he can manipulate time as well. And I was just on the precipice of entering God's light and stepping into heaven when I was shown another image. And that image was important to me because we all treasure our children. And this was an image of my middle child, Kurt. And because he was important to me, I wanted to, and I also knew that when I saw that picture, I understood something was going to happen in his life. And if I wasn't there to help him, his life would go down a not so good pathway. And so I told Jesus that I'm not ready to go yet. And he nodded his head. Even though I couldn't see his face, he nodded his head and smiled. And then that's when I changed back into my blue spirit body and sat down in my physical body. I put my spirit butt in my physical butt. I slipped a spiritual leg into each one of the physical legs, but not totally, because then I grabbed my spirit knees and I rocked back and forth in the physical body until its spirit could get to lay down, snap back in, and help it sit up and gasp for air. And all the while that I re-entered my body, there was a message from heaven that kept echoing over and over again. And it wasn't only for me, it's for everybody. And that voice kept saying, love is the only thing that matters. Love is the only thing that matters. Needless to say, that echoes in my voice every day, my body every day. And then I had to, now I was back in my body, and Jan was able to sit up and gasp for air, and she had to live her life wondering when the other shoe was going to drop for her son, Kurt, because she had no idea what the situation would be, and nor when it was going to happen. So after this experience and the progressive information that unfolded, I decided to sit down and read the Bible. That's why I came up with all these scriptures that matched what had happened, that also goes along with spirituality. And that's when I knew that he's trying to combine the both factions together, or open the awareness of the Christians to what the truth of spirituality. Sorry, I'm having trouble with that word today. Because we're all one. And I remember the Creator now. This is one of the verses. Yes, I remember the Creator now, while the silver cord of life snaps and the spirit will return to God who gave it. That silver cord is the tether that's in spirituality. So there was a lot of meaningful scripture that was there that helped me figure things out. More happened. But now that I've shared the first, second, and third NDE, that's not the entire story. After the third NDE, life went on, and I was still keeping everything to myself because my first initial experiences were not so good at sharing. So I kind of clammed up and didn't talk about it. But in these current times, especially with IANDS organization and the NDERF, people are more open to hearing these experiences, especially when more books are out on the for people to grab and read from. And my story is one of those, and I was fortunate enough to get my actually, I don't know if you ever heard of Guideposts. It's a non-denominational. Okay, they reached out to me in early of last year and asked if, out of the blue, they asked if they could put my story in one of their books of the NDE series, because they had done some research with their large membership and asked what kind of things that they'd like to hear more about, and that their response was they wanted to hear more about the near-death experiences. So actually, the head of the Guideposts went to the IANDS conference and investigated, and then she started collecting stories from there. And so she's got a whole, I was the 13th book, and each book had 4 experiences in it. So, and this is very popular for Christians as a reading source and faith source. So this will be in their faces too, and in their environment, so that they will realize that all of this is real, and they won't be so judgmental to our stories. And after they have 2 million members worldwide. Actually, that's nationwide. They have more worldwide. And after the third, I had suffered from many of the after effects of near-death experiences. I had a pile of watches that didn't work because it drained the batteries. My energy drained the batteries. My cell phone would often die when I was given a cell phone, and I didn't know why all this was happening. And when I would go into stores, I would have this energetic overload. I could feel everybody's thoughts and feelings coming toward me, like I was sitting at the end of at the bottom of a waterfall, and all this stuff was pelting me, and I didn't want it. I became nauseous and not ill, so I would have to have my husband do our grocery shopping. And I also started to see spirits, and this all complicated my life. The electrical phenomena, because when I would be rushing around getting ready to leave, the phone would ring, and because my energy would set off the phone, and so I'd go to answer it, nobody was there. And each time, that was just when caller ID came out, so I'd call the number back, and I'd always get this recording that said, you've reached a non-working number, please check your number and dial again. But, what are the chances? Every one of these times I get that message. Some of them were from the Caribbean, some of them were from New York. It was just from all over the place. And I eventually knew that God wanted me to do something with these experiences by what he shows me after these experiences that I haven't told you about. And I wanted to know what he wanted me to do. So I finally asked him just to tell me. And when I went to bed one night, I said a prayer. And I worded the prayer like this. I said, "Dear Father in heaven, please tell me what to do. And if you don't tell me what to do, I know this is for me and I don't have to do anything." And so I went to bed, not wanting an answer, nor expecting one, because then I could stay in my comfort zone, because I had already evaluated my strengths and weaknesses, and I knew I was not a good talker. I didn't think I could write a book, especially since I thought when I went to high school, I always thought the English language was backwards, which is meaningful to one of the things that happens in the future. And that made sense much later, that because I obviously had a lifetime in Europe and their language is different, is backwards. So I had discounted what I could do, but the next morning I woke up and God showed me visions of me writing a book and talking about it. And then I had the answer I didn't want. And I told myself, be careful what you ask for. Why did you ask that question? Because now I had to do something about it. Because when source tells you to do something, you do it. So that's why I based my book off of the moments that happened and what the deeper meaning is. He said, make it about me. And that's why I wrote the book in the fashion that I did, because he told me to make it about me. And he made me realize that I had set my own limitations. We all set our own limitations, and we can do more than we know because he's inside of us. He lives inside of us. And if we take baby steps to get there, we'll get there as long as we move ahead in life. But staying stagnant, he'll create difficult situations like he did with me to move me along in life to where I needed to be. If my husband and I, because my husband and I, after this, didn't seem to click anymore because I had been transformed and he didn't understand what was going on and he had to go through it too. We didn't know what the near-death experience was about. Fortunately, with all the efforts of the doctors and the organizations that are available today, a lot of people don't have to go through those things. Now, I'll tell you about another experience, though, after the NDDs. This is a council of high spiritual beings. Near-death experiencers are known to have either more near-death experiences, like I did, or more spiritual experiences because our awareness is wide open. So one night when I was laying in bed after reading my romance novel, because I was into romance novels that time, I was pulled up to heaven, to the in-between, and I found myself before a council of high spiritual beings for a lesson review. And I explained to them what I learned, and they were very happy with me and that I had grasped the learning that they had laid out for me. So part of that, what they had laid out for me, they made it known to me that Bob, my now husband, was brought into my life from the other side of the world because he lived in Europe for a specific lesson plan that was for both of us. Now, can you imagine the coordination it took for God to bring us together in the fashion that he did? And it was up to me to even accept him into my life or not. And after I met him and accepted him into my life, he took me to places in the world, over in Austria, where I saw and experienced things that made me realize how I had misjudged people in my life. So I was being taken back to the roots of where my judgments came from, because I had judged them on their clothing, and I had judged them, these people in my life, on their living style. And I didn't consider the fact that the world is made of immigrants from different countries. Everybody comes from there. I mean, this was when I was a child, I formed these opinions. My dad wore swimsuits down to his knees. So when I was young and playing in the pool outside, and I saw the neighbor's father who wore Speedo type swimming suits, it was embarrassing to me because he was not as modest as my dad was. So that's where I formed that judgment. As stupid as it is, that's where I formed that judgment. And they brought Bob into my life, who took me to certain parts of the world, and made me understand that I had misjudged people for very stupid things. So when we all do this in our own way, so we always need to consider when we have a judgment of people, where did that judgment come from? Go back to the very source of that, and don't accept what people tell you. You need to find out on your own, because I had heard my family say that my grandfather was an alcoholic. Well, I never saw my grandfather with a drink in his hand. He was in the World War II. And when he came home from World War II, his wife, in the meantime, had met another man. So was he drinking because of his failed marriage? Or was she looking for another man because he drank too much? Or was there even more to it? Was it post-traumatic stress disorder for what he experienced over there? So we don't know what makes a person the way they are today. They've experienced far different things than we have. So we always have to keep an open mind and not judge people as like we often do. And Bob, who was is my now husband, I saw in a dream vision before I even met him. So they were giving me signs all along, and in my efforts to understand telepathy, because everything was telepathic in these experiences, that I started to go to mediums to find out if they used telepathy to gain their insights as to what they need to tell the person that's there. And that's when I discovered that some of my loved ones that have passed kept telling me they see you writing, they see you writing. Well, I was journaling at that time, but I think what they were indicating to me is that I was going to be writing in the future, and so I should get used to it, because they kept saying I was writing. And I was also told that they saw people from Europe looking over at me, and I didn't know anybody in Europe at the time. And I said, well, I don't know what that's about, but now it makes sense because Bob lives in Europe, and his family always keep track of what I'm doing because now we're family. And in that vision of him, and it was another lifetime that I had with him, and he saved me in that other lifetime. And now we were brought together in this lifetime as well. So that's why I relate the backward language, and that's why I knew I had a life in Europe, and that's why I thought of the English as being backwards. Now, that didn't help me in learning the German language. It didn't automatically, magically come back. I still don't know the German language, only, in Julie Gong, which is excuse me, or Auf Wiedersehen. So, but everybody speaks English over there pretty much, so I don't have to worry about that. So I'm very grateful that they brought Bob into my life. And I specifically remember saying when they was sent back to my body, I said, that was so cleverly laid out for me to learn. And we're all chuckling about it. Even when I sat up in bed after I returned to my body, I was still chuckling because it was such an amazing experience, because as I explained things, the entire heavens lit up with my memories of what I saw when I created the judgment, and what I saw that made me understand that I had misjudged. So I find all near-death experiences fascinating, and those were only a few moments that God showed me, but I understand that some people would like to know how I wrote the book, and I call it my book of life, because as I was planning the book of life, my book of life, I laid out these moments, all the moments that I was shown, and on a timeline, and I wrote down the people in my life and what I learned from each one of these people, and I'm going to find out if when I get to heaven if this is what it actually was. But so I suggest that that's a good task to do. And so create the timeline, write down all the deja vu moments, and it, as you understand these moments and the people in life, you'll know who made a significant contribution to your life, like James Demos. That's why I've got a contract with him. He helped me figure out who the guide is. So consider both bad and good, because even the worst people who in your life are there for a particular reason. It could be because we're all learning emotions such as compassion, empathy, self-respect, or self-preservation, or strength, love, kindness, or how we can better express ourselves when we're in a conversation, or just by learning how to say no, or how to argue without being critical. So there's so many different things, ways, and that you can learn from different people. And so I suggest that people do that. They can learn who would they have soul contracts with, and what keeps cycling in their life. So if there's a problem that keeps cycling, you may feel like you've learned about it, but until you actually implement the learning, it won't go away. That was what happened to my daughter. She kept having a recurring dream, and she came to me for help. Well, I knew nothing about dreams. So we went to the bookstore, and I found a book on, my eyes were magnetically drawn to a book, and it was a book about dreams. And in that book, it solved her dilemma. And at the back of the book was the first time I had a sign of what happened to me. Even though I knew that was my share of God's spirit, I didn't know the rest of it. I couldn't make sense of all of it. But I found Sylvia Browne's book, and yes, and it was, she had in the back of the book, she had an excerpt of her next book, and it was all about the trip to heaven and the light of love and unbound freedom and everything that I experienced. So that was the first part that started unfolding information for me. And so I think this has been I look back on my life and I treasure everybody in my life, no matter even if they're bad, because they have contributed to who I am. And I like who I am today because it's through adversity where we gain the most advancement and most learning. And I just think I had a wonderful life, as the movie says.